The New Level Cap podcast is a show about fun, friends, game design, and all things otherwise. Your hosts are Marco DeSantos and Brad Telton of Level 99 Games. I'm Chris Solis, your producer, and without further ado, please enjoy the show.
Greetings, true believers, and welcome to the Level Cap podcast. I am your host, Brad Telton, founder of Level 99 Games, and with me, the mechanic critic, the man you know and love, Marco DeSantos himself.
Excelsior!
Yes, and we are here to talk about all things gaming and otherwise.
Yes, and mostly design, mostly memes, probably Kingdom Hearts. You know, by the time you're listening to this, it's probably like 2 weeks after Kingdom Hearts 3 came out, so that's exciting.
Yeah, I started Kingdom Hearts 3 yesterday. Well, I say started. I didn't play anything since Kingdom Hearts 2, so I watched the memory section, and then I started watching the intro, and about an hour later, my wife came in and she's like, "Brad, have you started playing this game yet?" And I was like, "No, I'm just catching up." I still don't feel like I understand at all what's happening.
Are you sure?
I really want to play a game where I get to visit these exciting Disney worlds from my childhood and meet all these characters and interact with them.
No, but you can't play that until you understand that the Master in the previous Keyblade War had to, take his 7 disciples, give them all pieces of this Genesis book, and then, one of the disciples is faceless, turns out to be Xehanort, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I don't care about that stuff. I want to go to the Pirates of the Caribbean world, and I want to, drink rum with Jack Sparrow. Well, why can't I do that? Why is your story getting in my way, Marco?
Because Sora's a minor. You can't have him drink.
He can drink orange juice. It's okay.
Brett, you have to understand that the experience is the payoff you get for understanding the convoluted, absurd, bat-crazy story. The effort, that's your reward.
I don't know if there's some licensing reason that they had to make this convoluted story, or if it's just, poor storytelling. I mean, why is Organization 13 not just 13 Disney villains? Why make up these other guys?
So that they could make 17 spin-off games about each and every single one of them. I said 17 because there's more.
It must have to do with merchandising. It must be to do with merchandising.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, each one of them has a different kind of weapon. Each one of them looks cool and whatever. And, contrary to the name, there's not...
The boss fights in 2 were with Organization 13 were the best.
Yes, that's true.
I feel like they could have easily been Disney villains, or even just maybe Final Fantasy characters that had stolen the Disney villains' power or something. But I don't know. It just seemed weird to make them this other thing that was totally disconnected from the premise, which is that we get to go to these cool Disney worlds and meet the characters and help them solve their problems.
See, they got it right in 1, where the main villain was actually just the Disney villain.
Well, that's the thing. Even in 1, Maleficent wasn't the main villain. I wish she had been. It would make great sense for Maleficent to be the main villain of everything. No, it's all 13 of Xehanort or something.
Yes.
Let's not even talk any further about this.
Okay, no, but to be fair, to be quote-unquote fair to Kingdom Hearts, the person in charge of the story, or the director of Kingdom Hearts, is not a storyteller, They're a costume designer. They're a character designer. Which might explain why we have all of these new characters popping up for no discernible reason other than they look cool and are merchandisable. Because that's what the director of Kingdom Hearts is all about.
I guess so.
Yeah.
It might just be a case of that you're picking the wrong person to direct, the property. But let's not talk any further. I don't want to throw too much Kingdom Hearts shade. I'm sure we'll have another episode where we get to do all of that. And I'm not far enough in to have... to have reached peak shade yet.
Reach peak shade? You know what, Brad? So if understanding the story of Kingdom Hearts is the thing you have to do in order to receive the payoff on an enjoyable Disney Square Enix experience, I feel like that's a relevant topic for this week, where we talk about... Brad?
We're going to talk about decision matrices and payoffs this week. Mainly about payoffs, but also about how they relate to a decision matrix in the whole, in games.
You can either take the blue pill and tell me what it's all about, or take the red pill and go back to living your pitiful, pitiful life.
I feel like my life is pretty great, but I actually want to complete the podcast, so I guess I'll tell you what it's about.
All right, you take the blue pill. He's beginning to believe.
So
get it? It's a decision matrix.
this is. I guess this is a decision matrix. There are two outputs, but there was really only one output. I was gonna have to tell you about this anyway.
Yeah, but
right? Regardless of what my answer was.
But still, no, Brad, you don't get it. That was the scene from The Matrix where you had to make a decision.
Yeah, everybody knows The Matrix, Marco.
Oh, Brad, I was just
2019.
Actually, I was just making sure you understood my deep reference.
Listeners, this podcast might think The Matrix is a classic movie by now. That makes me feel pretty old.
We're all pretty old, Brad. That was Nerd Marco. He was nerd-splaining to you.
Wow. Okay. All right, Nerd Marco. Let me explain. Let me game-splain to you what we're talking about today.
All right. What are decision matrices and payoffs?
Yes. Every game system has three basic parts: the inputs, a results matrix, and payoffs. Right. Mm-hmm. Your input is what we choose to play, what strategies we're going to take, what choices we're going to make. Here's your red pill, blue pill. Your matrix is sort of the internal system of the game that determines how my input becomes an output, along with other factors, how it transforms into an output. And then the payoff is what I get for a certain output from the game, right? And it's pretty easy. In this case, you take the red pill, you go one direction, take the blue pill, you go another direction. But what if there are other results involved or other inputs involved? What if the pills interact negatively with what I ate for dinner last night? What if there's also a random factor and one of the blue pills is poisoned? Stuff like that. So there might be many different outcomes to many different payouts from this matrix. That's the general structure of a game, and all games have this structure, at least from a theoretical standpoint, from a mathematical standpoint. Every game takes inputs, transforms them in some way, produces an output.
It kind of relates, not just like it has a basic level and a very overarching level, right? So on the basic level, you have stuff like controller inputs, right? Like you press forward on the controller, something happens in math, and then your character moves forward. It's like that, right? Mm-hmm. But then you have overarching things, right? Like this is what we're talking about, the more overarching payout matrices. Like, for example,
not literal inputs, but strategic inputs.
There you go.
The way I choose to play, the decisions I choose to make, and what the results of those are, and how the game communicates to me that those choices were correct or incorrect. That's the payoff.
Yeah, so we touched upon this in the previous episode where we were talking about rubber band mechanics or tailwinds and headwinds. This is essentially like, when you do the winning strategy, what does the game then give you in return?
How does the game let you know that you've won?
Yeah.
Right? And usually the players are going to be in control of the inputs in the system, and the game designer is in control of the matrix itself and the payoffs that come out at the end. So I can give you a really simple example of a two-input game, rock, paper, scissors, right? Mm-hmm. One of us is going to throw one thing, the other is going to throw another thing. Those are our two inputs. There's a matrix, which is the system of rock beats scissors, scissors beat paper, paper beats rock, and then payoff is the number of points that we would get for a winning throw. For example, and especially in this episode, we talk about payoffs, we'll see that you can change the payoffs in a matrix to actually radically change the way a game is played. For example, if winning with rock gives you 10 points, and winning with scissors gives you 5 points, and winning with paper gives you 1 point, what do you think people would throw the most often?
Of course, they'd throw rock, right?
Well, they might actually start throwing paper, because everybody is going to play rock. Right?
Now we're getting on the Omi levels, Brad.
Right. So you start to get into the system of this payout matrix is actually changing the inputs that players are giving us.
Yeah, that's true.
So it can go. Yeah. So it can go. It can change the game, and it's a control that designers have to, without changing the gameplay at all, to change the way that strategies work and the way that players will interact with the game.
Yeah, because we didn't change, quote-unquote, how paper beats rock or rock beats paper or something like that, right?
Yeah, just what you get if you play in a certain way and win.
Yeah, so that's a very distinct thing that we have to separate when talking about this, because people often associate payoffs and the matrices and feel like they are one and the same thing and bundle it under gameplay. You know what I mean? So it's very important to separate that. I want to make a point that payoffs and payouts, despite their name, are a bit misleading because it's not always a good thing. Payoffs and payouts aren't always good. They could be negative.
You can definitely get a negative, and especially in a zero-sum game. And that's the reason we call these a zero-sum game, is that any positive for one side is necessarily a negative for the other side. For example, if we're in a race and only one of us can win, then every step you take is putting me further behind, and vice versa. There's no situation where we both can make positive ground through, through a series of inputs.
Yeah.
Either we're neutral or one of us is winning at the other's expense. And that's what we say when we say zero-sum games.
Yeah, because if you add everything together, it should, quote-unquote, result in neutral, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ground gained by the winner is equal to the ground lost by the loser, and vice versa.
Indeed. So, in the end, these kinds of things are very important for all of us to understand, because as game designers and as game players, we have to understand how winning strategies work. So, as a player, it's very good to understand this so that you know how strategies are evaluated and what things you should go for to win.
Yeah. How to identify a winning strategy by looking at the payoffs, and how to figure out what the strategy is by determining what inputs lead to that payoff. And it's not always obvious, because many games have a complex set of inputs and can have several high points and several low points, and doesn't mean that there aren't even higher payouts hidden somewhere else in the game's input matrix.
That's true. I mean, like, for example, in chess, sacrifice plays make no sense in terms of payout, because you literally purposely lose a piece. But on an overarching level, on a strategic level, the payout's actually better than the piece that you lost, right?
Yeah, the position can be stronger than an individual piece. But you wouldn't know that just looking at, at one small slice of the picture.
Indeed. And as designers, it's very important to understand how these work, because I think let's start talking about how everything can be implemented in a game. Because implemented in a game, these kinds of payouts basically encourage/discourage certain actions that players should take, right?
Yeah. Well, most importantly, I think they tell us what we should be doing, right? Like, when usually there's the big payoff is you win, right? Like, if in a game of basketball, if you can have the most points at the end of the game, you win. That's the payoff. And it's completely abstract, right? Like, winning doesn't mean anything to anyone, except for the meaning you attach to it in terms of a bonus or a bet or just the good feelings that it brings with it. So you decide your own payoffs for winning, but within that, our individual activities give us some ground towards reaching that win objective.
Yes,
which is our ultimate payoff.
I guess ultimately your payoffs and your matrices and your inputs actually just define the entire game itself, right?
The mechanical system of the game, at least in terms of what strategies are valid and what results those strategies generate.
Yeah. Because in basketball, for example, there's nothing in the matrix that says you get points for whacking someone with a basketball, so people usually don't do it if they want to win, right?
Yeah, you want to typically optimize the strategies that are going to bring you closer to, to the high payoff, the victory.
Yeah.
But the reason that I get into this is because the payoff is how we let the players know what they ought to be doing. And when you see this, a player who is consistently achieving the better results for their actions is going to consistently win the game or consistently be doing better. And players can look at what other players are doing, look at their inputs and their outputs, and kind of understand the inside workings of the game.
Yes, so Brad, let's talk about how we use to fix them in our games. Can you talk about some examples? So
Exceed is a game that really has a lot of game theory involved, a lot of that baked right into the core. And when we talk about Exceed, there are actually two decision matrices in the game. One is the turn-by-turn actions, and the other are strikes. So in your turn-by-turn actions, you have about 6 different inputs, the 6 actions that you can take on a turn. Each of these is just a flat positive payoff. There's one input, and then a thing happens, and you get your payoff. And they're all positive. The only one that's not is strike. But strike is the only action that actually can score for the player because it can reduce the opponent's life.
Yes.
So when you step into strike, then you move into this other matrix, which is inside the decision matrix, or inside the action matrix. There's a smaller strike matrix. And that's the zero-sum game, where there are two inputs to consider, and they lead into a much more complex interactive matrix. So you have to consider your actions in terms of the opponent, and each combination of actions, each different range has a different payoff. So that's where things can get quite complex. With Exceed, ranges are fixed. There's not a lot of ways to alter your range, and so the payoffs are usually pretty clear, and you can just play the strategy you want. And I think this is one of the big advantages that Exceed has, is that it's very clear which card implements each of the major strategies, and how each of those strategies interacts with each of the opponent's strategies. And even when you get special moves in the mix, they typically fall into one of the three strategic categories of being offensive or defensive or control.
Yes. Very, very much true. I think this is a big difference between Exceed and BattleCon. But let's not digress.
BattleCon, things are very tangled up. Every action you have to consider along multiple different decision matrices, because I only get to pick 2 cards, but I have to use those 2 cards to do damage, to do my movement, to set up my economy for future turns, and to interact with what my opponent's doing and plan my counterattack. So that BattleCon is a much more entangled sort of matrix.
You know how I explain it?
How would you explain it?
In BattleCon, it's about how much stuff you can cram into one attack, right? It doesn't matter if the stats are low. If your attack has acceptable everything, that's a good attack, right? If it has acceptable everything. In Exceed, if your attack has mediocre or below average most things, but is basically broken in one thing, that makes it a good attack. So that's kind of like how I see it. Right, like
because those cards only have to carry one axis. They only have to carry one decision matrix. They don't have to carry multiple matrices.
Yeah, because basically BattleCon attack pairs are trying to do strikes and all of the out of strike actions that you do in Exceed all in one thing, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to do boosts, you're trying to do movement, you're trying to get resources, all by using strikes. In Exceed, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to worry about me hit guy hit me, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't strike unless you already know or already believe that you're going to win in Exceed. That's not true. The case in BattleCon.
No, because you're forced to.
But anyway, that's just one example. Every game has these 3 elements: inputs, matrix, and results. So every game could be used as an example here. The reason Exceed is interesting is because it has that 2-tiered system.
So Brad, as much as I'd like to keep talking ad nauseum about all of the examples that we could possibly give, I think we need a break so that you can go play some Kingdom Hearts and come back and give our viewers a little break as well.
Sure. Let's take a short break, and we will be right back with more about decision matrices and payoffs.
Millennium Blades Collusion is now on Kickstarter. Discover 400 new cards, NPCs, team play, and an epic storage solution to store it all. You can find a link to the Kickstarter in the description.
Gosh, Brad, welcome back from the break. It's me, your pal Goofy.
I wanted more time to play Kingdom Hearts.
It's my bad Donald impression.
Okay, I thought you were doing Nerd Brad or something.
Oh man, that's how bad it is. That's how bad my Donald is.
Oh my gosh. Gosh, Brad, that was such a bad Donald impression.
Well, if you hadn't taken the easy voice, I could have done that.
Alright, then I'll do Sora, Goofy, Donald, light, dark. Okay, regardless, welcome back from the break, everyone. We played a little bit too much of Kingdom Hearts. That's why it happened. I'm now Goofy.
Your Sora's pretty good too, Marco, I gotta say.
Thanks. All right, everyone. Welcome back. And thankfully, you have waited through our break. And as a payoff to your decision, you will now get to listen to the next half of this episode. Brad, decision matrices, payoffs, they're in every game. So you have to basically deal with them, right? So how
I
can
mean, if you're making a game, they're going to be there. So the question is, are you going to choose to think about them, in more of a theoretical way, or are you going to just kind of wing it until you get your balance right?
preferably you do the first, right? Because I don't think winging it is a good
preferably.
strategy.
We've tried winging it a few times. That's how you get original pixel tactics.
Oh my
Anyway,
oh my gosh. For people
So,
who don't
yeah.
know, for people who don't know, oh my gosh, there's just basically one broken card in it, and it's too strong.
there's a few broken cards, but one card's so broken it eclipses all broken cards. But let's not talk about the ghosts of board games past. Let's talk about payoffs done right.
Yeah, how can they positively impact an experience?
What do you stand to gain if you do this the right way? Well, as a designer, you really get to direct the game experience because you can put higher rewards on the actions that are going to make the game more fun. And you can put lower rewards on the actions or behaviors that are less fun.
I want to give an example that is not board game, video game related. Oh my gosh, Brad.
Go for it.
Let's talk about basketball. So for the longest time, maybe in like the early 90s, basketball was heavily dominated by, essentially like power players who could like dunk the ball real good. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Good basketball boys who could dunk real good.
Are these people that just have a natural advantage because they're tall and can jump high? Or are we talking...
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's also
Yeah.
the people who compensate by being good jumpers, right? I mean, like, ideally, you'd be
Okay.
both, right? Like,
Yeah, but basically people that could make a perfect defense or a perfect offense, right?
basically. So, but over
'Cause a
time,
dunk, you can't really defend a dunk once it's in progress.
yes, unless you are like anime levels of good or something. So, but the thing is, over time, as basketball has developed, more and more teams have become homogenized into basically having a bunch of 3-point scorers, and everybody just shoots from the 3-point line
hmm
all the time. And this is a quote-unquote problem that a lot of people have in terms of basketball because all the teams now quote-unquote look the same. Because we're now in an era where every team has at least 1 or 2 sharpshooters who can shoot from 3-point line. And this progression basically is that optimization of that matrix because 3 points are worth more than 2 points. And that's like...
Well, it's funny you say that because the 3-point line was actually implemented as to create a new strategy, because it used to be that the tall players in the center would just dominate because they were too difficult to shoot over, and so they implemented the 3-point line to give a higher reward to the risk of taking these long shots.
Yep.
And it seems to have worked, but at the same time, like those long shots are much more difficult to interact with.
Yeah, which is why there's a huge problem in basketball now where basically defense doesn't matter anymore. Because like all that needs to happen is that if one team has 2 or 3 3-point shooters, all 3 of them have to just stand in different spots, and if somebody starts defending one of them, they pass and then that person shoots. Like there's almost no point in defending the inside anymore because the defense gets stretched so thin that it becomes untenable. So, I mean,
yeah. I mean, there's different ways that they could fix that. I assume the NBA will eventually fix it because they have a long history of working to make basketball better for television.
Yeah, they do.
But that's an example where, like, yeah, the payoff control of 3 points and the input strategy of shooting in a way that is difficult to defend have aligned too closely and too clearly. So people just are becoming exploitative. That's a good example of the kind of problems that can arise with this, when you're looking at these kind of game design ideas and how you can use these game design ideas to fix them. So the other part of using payoffs well, you can use them to balance actions in your game that might be easier or harder to confirm, or which are going to carry a lower or higher risk. So like in fighting games, your light punch doesn't do as much damage because it's a lot easier to land. Your heavy punch, which leaves you open and carries with it a big risk, is going to be is going to pay out a lot more in terms of damage.
Mm.
Same thing like in card games. If you put a high cost card in your deck, that there's a risk because you might not get to the late game to a situation where you can play that card. So this is why high costs actually are exponentially more powerful than low cost cards, because each additional resource that the card costs means it's going to take you longer to play it, which if greatly reduces its effectiveness for a larger part of the game. So the payoff shouldn't be just linear, it actually needs to be exponential as cards become higher in cost and restrictiveness to play.
That sounds about correct to me. You know, actually, I've been listening to a lot of Magic the Gathering podcasts recently, and oftentimes I really find it interesting how Magic balances their costs, right? Because a thing that has the same cost as another thing isn't necessarily easier to cast. You know what I mean? Right? Like,
Yeah.
a 3-mana CMC artifact, or converted mana cost, a 3-mana artifact could be significantly easier to cast than a 3-color creature.
A 3-color spell, right?
Yeah.
Something that requires fixed mana.
Exactly, because, you know, colorless mana is more flexible and the other one is inflexible. So even if they cost the same amount of mana, because one costs specific kinds of mana, it deserves to be more powerful.
Yeah, and if you don't make those right, then everyone will just play artifacts because they're easy. And if you overtune it, then everyone will play 3-color because 3-color is too powerful to not play. And that's when we talk about payoffs like being poorly implemented, you can really create some of these negative situations.
Yeah.
For example, if the payoffs are unbalanced in such a way, you can warp the game to make some actions really unplayable and some actions forced. You can actually take away the player agency if your payouts and inputs don't match well.
I think the positives are very clear, right? So let's move on to the negatives, because this tends to be where this blows out of proportion. Because oftentimes when a payoff matrix is right, people don't recognize that it's right. People more often recognize when it's wrong.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to recognize when something is wrong. And we'd say, like, let's go back to card games. In Hearthstone, there was a card called Knife Juggler, and it was like a 2-mana 3/2, 2-mana 3/2 with every time you play a creature, it deals a damage.
Yeah.
And the card was so strong that it was almost auto include in every deck. Like, it was hard to play without this card because the payoff for playing it was so good. So in this case, the cost of the card, the input, and the power level of the card, the output, were disjointed in such a way that forced the players to play it, really taking away their agency in deck building. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a notorious example of this. Like, there's about 15, at least when I played back in the day, there were about 15 to 20 staple cards that you had to include, and then you could build your deck with the other 20 to 25 card slots you had left after all the mandatory cards were included.
Yeah, like Monster Reborn, like everything that's basically on the ban list. that's basically it.
Anything that's banned or limited, you kind of have to use as much of it as you can.
In Hearthstone, let's not forget the better example, which is Dr. Boom, right?
Yeah, Dr. Boom is a great one, because there was a time when, like, you just couldn't play without this card. There was no meta except everybody plays Dr. Boom. But this there are other things too that can maybe not be completely negative, but are so unintuitive that that they don't really help. Like choosing to go to second place on purpose in Mario Kart so you can avoid blue shells. Right?
Yes. So that becomes the payoff makes it counterintuitive for how the game's supposed to be played.
Yeah, like going in first place makes it so dangerous that you choose not to go into first place, which is clearly not proper racing etiquette, right?
No, sir, you first. Like, imagine first and second place.
I mean, if you respect your opponent, you should play as well as you can, but it's a mechanism which could introduce a bias towards suboptimal play. It's important to make sure that best play earns you best rewards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like in the previous episode, we talked about two other examples, right? So we talked about in BattleCon where there was a Burman strat where you would purposely lose so that you could just finish her and kill someone. And then
with your one-hit kill.
With your one-hit kill from Dragon Flare. And then there was another strat in Dota Auto Chess where a lose streak was basically the same as a win streak in terms of payoff. So since it was easier to lose, you would just lose all the time.
Yeah.
Which, again,
So-
makes very little sense. And this is what happens when
Throw
you're...
is real.
The throw is real because it makes very little sense, because these things reward you for doing things that are not just unfun, but also reward you for doing things that are counterintuitive to the actual game experience it's supposed to be delivering. You know what I mean? Like, it's basically the equivalent of like the game rewarding you for playing the game wrong, or the game punishing you for playing the game right, which doesn't make any sense.
That's why it's so important to understand your payoff matrix, because these aren't faults of the game. They are faults of the reward structure in the game. And just by changing the reward structure a little bit, changing the payoffs for cards, you can fix these problems without fixing actual game systems by tweaking the inputs and the outputs. But in another sense, we talked a lot about things that are too strong or things that are too good and warp play. But the other side of that, sometimes you have moves that just don't have any payoff at all, or the payoff is so minimal that players just don't want to go through the trouble, or on a micro level, these could be strats that players don't want to play. Like in our rock paper scissors example, if rock is worth 100 and scissors is worth 50 and paper is worth 1, it's a lot harder to justify playing paper, because 1 win with rock is worth 100 wins with paper. Right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes, and in a larger sense, you might have things like achievements, like win the game using only paper. Well, nobody's gonna waste the time on that just for the good feelings. So those kind of payoffs mostly are relegated to our achievement systems, just for the people that really want to go for it and do wacky stuff.
So memes
pretty
are
much
basically this, right? So in Hearthstone parlance, when you say something is a meme card, it means that it's not actually gonna win you more games, but winning with it is funny, right?
Perhaps. I mean, that's a different kind of payoff too, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that's a payoff that you make for yourself. It's not within the system. In a closed system, it's not a good payoff. Nobody would actually want to play this unless you make your own payoff and say that winning is not the goal, right? Players, I've seen lots of players like this, and the epitome of it is Daniel Zeiger himself, Tierenkin, who is master of doing these stupid things, like, oh my gosh, like no reload Rukyuk games, or jank like, let's get installed to 20 power on Riflem. It's like none of these are good strategies, but it's just fun for them to win that way, and that's in itself okay, right? But if these were mandatory, if these were actually things in the game that were quote-unquote required, people would feel very frustrated that they'd have to do no reload Rukyuk, right? Or have to build install to 20 power when it usually loses them the game.
Yeah, so it's important not to make a payoff that doesn't map to its effort, right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of leads into the third major problem that you could have with these, is if your payoffs and your inputs are not clearly linked. If players do a thing and then the game system happens and then they get some payoff and they don't understand how their input mapped to that payoff, right? And a lot of times you hear players say, well, I don't even know what I'm doing. I just did a thing. Or, I'm just going to try something. I have no idea what's going to happen. And this is kind of a signal as a designer that, hey, maybe I haven't made my input to output structure transparent enough for the players. They just feel like it's a luck-based, skillless game.
Yes.
So it's important that that you have that transparency, that you have that connection between input and output, both thematically and mechanically.
Even if the entire game you've designed has clearly linked stuff in your mind, and like when you designed it, if the players are not able to discern that link properly, it's all for naught as well.
Yeah, like Kingdom Hearts is a great example of this. When I get into a battle, I mash X until the triangle lights up, and then I mash triangle, and then a boat appears and destroys all the enemies around me. And then if the boat didn't work, then I also get to go into my second form, which doesn't have a real discernible difference, but if I push triangle again, I do a super move after that, and then Donald and Goofy start doing crazy stuff. Like, I have no idea why these things are happening, And so I don't feel like my inputs, and it doesn't seem like there really is a map. It's like if I hit X 3 times in a row, I will get a cool payoff. I don't know that there's any like real structure to that. I don't feel that the game involves any skill. I feel like it is just luck. But contrast that with something like Devil May Cry, right? Where I have a style bar, and I clearly know that as soon as I get hit, my style drops to 0. As long as I can chain hits together and I keep mixing up my moves, my style will keep increasing. There's a clear payoff between, or there's a clear link between the inputs that I do and the payoff I get out in the style gauge. And then the reason that I want that, which is so that I get the bonus red orbs so that I can level up my character and get even more cool moves.
That's true. But if you think about it, it also really depends on the player themselves, right? So it's not just the games in and of themselves. You know what I mean? So I think...
Well, I think it is really about the game, because if the player can't detect that link between what they're doing and what is happening on screen, then they're going to be confused, and they're going to feel like they're watching a movie, not playing a game. If my inputs don't control the outputs, what is a game even?
What is a game but a miserable pile of code?
But enough talk! Have at you!
No, but ultimately I was talking more about like conveyance of the game. Because like when a new player gets into, say, something like StarCraft, right? Like there's clearly defined matrices in StarCraft, like X unit beats Y unit. But if you're a new player who's just gotten into StarCraft, it basically doesn't make any sense. And we get back to Kingdom Hearts. Even though the game is designed to have that matrix, if it obscures it behind so much information that the average player can't access that matrix easily, then has the game failed? Or is the game not properly implementing these matrices?
I think that's a good point, that it can be a failure of tutorial as well, not just a failure of system.
So ultimately, this is all to say that Kingdom Hearts makes no sense in terms of plot and gameplay.
Or mechanics.
Why are we playing this game again?
Like, where did these rides come from?
Why are we playing this game again? Like, can you...
All right. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up for this episode, where we talk about inputs, decision matrices, and payoffs. It's been me, your host, Brad Talton, also known as Brad, and with me, my more interestingly named co-host,
Marco DeSantos, also known as Marco, also known as the Mechanic Critic, also known as Brad.
Wait, you're also known as Brad?
Yes.
Who calls you Brad?
People in my dreams, I guess. I don't know. Oh, no. Okay, to be fair, Brad is a Filipino slang that you call any other male member of the Philippine society who is your friend. Because when you say someone's your Brad, that means they're your brother. You know?
I see.
So, yes.
Sounds kind of like blood. Is this a mafia thing?
No, it's just the Filipino pronunciation of brother. Like it's like bro. It's like calling someone bro. So unless bro is a mafia thing, then that's how mafia work, right?
Oh dear. All right. Let's wrap it up. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you'll leave us a comment, give us your thoughts on these topics that we shared today. If you enjoyed the podcast, share it with a friend. If you didn't enjoy it, well, it's episode 6. Why are you still listening? But I guess share it with your rivals and frenemies, as Marco would say. So anyway, without further ado, it's been me, Brad, and my co-host Marco, wishing you all happy gaming and a great evening.
Thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.
The new Level Cap podcast is produced by Level 99 Games. Join us next Wednesday for more design talk and shenanigans. Thank you for listening.